The Collins family arrived on a quiet Sunday afternoon, their moving truck rattling down the narrow suburban lane. The neighborhood was older, rows of modest houses with cracked driveways, faded paint, and untrimmed hedges. Yet for David and Sarah Collins, it felt like a fresh start. After years of living in cramped apartments, this house finally offered enough space for them and their 12-year-old daughter, Emily. As the movers unloaded boxes, Sarah glanced toward the house next door. Unlike the others on the street, this one stood in an unsettling silence. Its paint peeled like flaking skin, windows hidden behind heavy curtains. The garden, once beautiful, was now wild with weeds and thorny vines. At one of the upstairs windows, a pale face briefly appeared. A woman, middle-aged, watching. Sarah froze. When she blinked, the figure was gone. That night, as the family unpacked, Emily sat near her window, sketching in her notebook. She had a habit of drawing everything she noticed, even shadows. Across the yard, she saw the same woman again, standing at the window of the decaying house. The woman's face was long and drawn, her gray hair messy, her expression unreadable. Emily whispered to herself, "She looks like a ghost." The woman raised her hand slowly, not in a wave, but as though reaching toward Emily. Then, without warning, the light in her house flickered out. Emily snapped her notebook shut, heart racing. The next day, while David fixed the leaking faucet in the kitchen, Sarah spoke with a neighbor across the street. The woman, Mrs. Harlow, leaned closer and whispered, "You've moved next to Eleanor Gray, haven't you? Poor soul. Husband died years ago. They say she went strange after that. Always lurking at night, talking to herself." Sarah forced a polite smile, but unease curled in her stomach. When she returned home, she noticed a fresh set of boot prints in the soil near their side fence. Too large for Emily, too fresh for David. They led from Mrs. Gray's yard toward theirs. On the third night, something strange happened. A heavy chandelier in the dining room, which had hung securely since they moved in, suddenly snapped free of its chain. It crashed to the ground with a deafening thud, just seconds after Emily had left the table to fetch a glass of water. David cursed under his breath, examining the chain. It wasn't rusted. It wasn't broken. It looked cut. But no one else had been in the room. From the corner of her eye, Sarah noticed a curtain in the house next door shifting, as though someone had been watching. That night, Emily woke screaming. She described a dream where black, shadowy hands reached for her bed, but an unseen figure pulled her away. "She had gray hair," Emily whispered, clutching her blanket, "like the lady next door." Sarah tried to soothe her, insisting it was only a dream. But deep inside, Sarah remembered the chandelier, the footprints, the feeling of being watched. The following evening, as Sarah took out the trash, she saw Mrs. Eleanor Gray up close for the first time. The woman was standing near her garden fence, her pale skin glowing under the porch light. She didn't speak, but her eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her freeze in place. Then Eleanor lifted one crooked finger and pressed it to her lips. Silence. Sarah dropped the trash bag and hurried inside, trembling. Later that night, David smelled gas in the kitchen. He rushed in to find the stove's valve wide open. If Emily had lit her midnight candle, as she often did, there could have been an explosion. But on the counter sat a note, scribbled on yellow paper in shaky handwriting. "Check the stove." No one in the family had written it. David stormed out to the backyard, furious, ready to accuse Eleanor of trespassing. But her house was completely dark, curtains sealed, no movement at all. Still, the family could not shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching over them. Lying awake in bed, Emily whispered to herself, "She isn't trying to scare us. She's saving us." She thought of the chandelier, the gas valve, even her dream. Could it be possible? Could the frightening woman next door actually be keeping them safe? As the night deepened, Emily saw movement in the shadows again. Not Eleanor this time. Dark shapes seemed to crawl along the walls of her room, stretching toward her. She held her breath, frozen. Then, a flash of light from outside. Eleanor's upstairs window lit with a strange glow, and the shadows recoiled instantly, vanishing into the corners of the room. Emily sat up, trembling but alive, knowing the truth her parents didn't yet believe. The woman next door was protecting them. The Collins family tried to settle into a routine, though the strangeness of their new home made it difficult. Days felt normal enough. David left for work at the accounting office. Sarah began unpacking boxes and arranging the kitchen. Emily went to school. The quiet suburban lane seemed almost peaceful beneath the warm autumn sun. But at night, everything changed. Strange noises echoed through the house. The sound of footsteps in the hallway when no one was there, whispers in the attic, the scraping of nails against the walls. David dismissed it all as old house problems, creaking wood and poor insulation. Sarah wanted to believe him, but her instincts told her something else lurked beneath their roof. One evening, as Sarah folded laundry in the bedroom, she noticed something unsettling: a small bundle of dried herbs tied with twine hidden beneath Emily's pillow. It smelled faintly of lavender mixed with something bitter, metallic. Sarah frowned, wondering if Emily had brought it from school. But when she asked her daughter, Emily shook her head. "I didn't put it there." "Maybe the lady next door did," she whispered. Sarah scolded her gently, telling her not to invent stories. Yet inside, her unease deepened. That night, Sarah was jolted awake by the sound of heavy breathing just outside her bedroom door. She sat up, straining her ears. The breathing grew louder, ragged, almost animal-like. Slowly, she reached for the lamp. But before she could switch it on, the breathing stopped. The silence that followed was worse. The next morning, Emily told her mother she'd seen something. A shadow in the corner of her room. "It wasn't shaped like a person," Emily said softly, drawing it in her sketchbook. Her picture showed a tall, thin figure with elongated arms and empty white eyes. "It was watching me, but then the lady came." Sarah stiffened. "What do you mean?" Emily explained that she had woken in the middle of the night to find Eleanor Gray standing outside her window, clutching a strange lantern that glowed with a faint blue light. As soon as the lantern's glow touched the shadow, it vanished into smoke. Sarah didn't know what to say. She wanted to dismiss it as imagination, but Emily's sketches were too vivid, too precise. Meanwhile, David grew more frustrated with the house. He spent evenings repairing what felt like endless problems. Leaking pipes, faulty wiring, locks that jammed for no reason. "This place is a money pit," he muttered, cursing as yet another fuse blew. But sometimes, when he inspected the damage, he found something odd. A melted wire that should have started a fire, but didn't. A cracked pipe that should have flooded the basement, but hadn't. It was as if someone had intervened before disaster could strike. One late evening, David decided to investigate the yard. Armed with a flashlight, he walked along the fence separating their property from Eleanor Gray's. He half expected her to appear, glaring from her window. Instead, he noticed something odd: small wooden charms hanging from the branches of a tree near the fence line. They were crudely carved, each marked with symbols David didn't recognize. His beam caught movement in the shadows. He turned sharply. Nothing there. But when he looked up again, Eleanor herself was standing in her yard, staring at him with those unblinking eyes. "What are you doing with these?" David demanded, pointing at the charms. Eleanor said nothing. Instead, she raised a trembling hand and pointed at the Collins house. Her lips moved silently, forming words he couldn't hear. The hair on his arms rose. Shaken, David stumbled back inside, locking the door behind him. The next day, Sarah visited the library, driven by a gnawing curiosity. She searched local archives, hoping to learn more about Eleanor Gray. She discovered that Eleanor once had a family of her own, a husband and a young daughter. But tragedy had struck 20 years earlier. The daughter, only Emily's age, had vanished without a trace. Days later, Eleanor's husband was found dead in the woods, his face frozen in terror. Rumors spread that Eleanor had gone mad, that she wandered the neighborhood muttering about things in the dark. Eventually, the neighbors shunned her. She lived alone ever since. That night, Sarah confronted Eleanor from across the fence. "Why are you watching us?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Eleanor stepped closer, the moonlight casting deep shadows across her face. Finally, she spoke, her voice raspy from years of disuse. "They come for children," she whispered. "They always come. I couldn't save my daughter, but I will not let them take yours." Sarah froze, chills racing down her spine. Before she could respond, Eleanor retreated into her house, slamming the door shut. That evening, Emily had another dream. She saw dark hands reaching through the walls, claws stretching toward her bed. But this time, she wasn't afraid. In the dream, Eleanor stood guard at the foot of the bed, her lantern glowing brighter than ever. "Stay strong, child," Eleanor murmured. Emily awoke with tears on her cheeks, her heart pounding. When Sarah checked on her daughter, she found something that made her blood run cold. Scratched into the wooden floor beneath Emily's bed were claw marks. Fresh ones. They hadn't been there yesterday. The family could no longer deny it. Something malevolent was in their house. And somehow, the frightening woman next door was the only thing keeping it at bay. The Collins family tried to cling to a sense of normalcy, but fear had already seeped into every corner of their home. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights reminded them that something unnatural lingered there. And though Eleanor Gray terrified them, they could no longer dismiss the possibility that she was, in her own strange way, protecting them. Sarah struggled most with this duality. Each morning, she found small tokens in unexpected places. Bundles of herbs above door frames, chalk symbols drawn faintly near the windowsills, tiny glass bottles buried in the soil of her garden. At first, she thought Eleanor was sneaking into their yard. But the more she examined these items, the more she realized they were not random. They were protective wards, the kind she had only seen in books about folklore and witchcraft. Emily grew increasingly attached to the idea that Eleanor was her secret guardian. One morning, Sarah discovered a drawing taped to Emily's wall. It showed their family standing inside the house, while Eleanor stood outside, holding her glowing lantern, shielding them from a storm of monstrous shadows. Sarah wanted to scold her, to warn her against idolizing the strange neighbor. But instead, she found herself staring at the drawing for a long time, uneasy with how much truth might lie within its childish lines. David, on the other hand, grew restless. He hated the feeling of being watched, hated the way Eleanor lingered near their fence at dusk as though keeping vigil. "She's unstable," he muttered one evening. "She lost her family and now she's projecting her madness onto ours. That's all this is." But even as he spoke, Sarah noticed the way his hands trembled, how his eyes darted toward the windows as if expecting something to appear. That night, it almost did. The Collins family had just settled into bed when Emily screamed. David rushed to her room, only to find his daughter frozen in terror, pointing at the corner. At first, he saw nothing. Then the shadows seemed to thicken, pulling together like liquid darkness. A shape emerged, a towering figure with limbs too long, its head tilting at an impossible angle. Its eyes glowed faintly, pale and empty, like twin moons. David lunged forward, shouting at the thing to leave his daughter alone. But before he could reach her, the air shimmered. The bedroom window burst open with a gust of icy wind, and there she was, Eleanor Gray. She stood outside, holding her lantern high. The strange blue light spilled into the room, searing the shadow. The creature shrieked without a mouth, folding in on itself until it dissolved into mist. David stood frozen. His daughter clutched him, sobbing. Eleanor's eyes met his, piercing and unyielding. "You cannot fight them with anger," she rasped, her voice low but steady. "Only with light and strength of spirit. Keep her close, or they will come again." Before David could respond, she turned and disappeared into the night. The next morning, the family gathered at the kitchen table, shaken. "We need to move out," David insisted. "I don't care how much money we lose. This place isn't safe." "But what if they follow us?" Sarah whispered. She showed him the claw marks she'd discovered beneath Emily's bed. These things aren't tied to the house. They're tied to us. And Eleanor knows more about them than we do. David's jaw tightened. He hated to admit it, but she was right. For all her strangeness, Eleanor had saved their daughter. Twice. Emily, still pale and quiet from the night before, finally spoke. She said they wanted me. Why me? No one had an answer. Later that day, Sarah worked up the courage to approach Eleanor's house. She knocked on the door, her heart hammering. At first, there was no response. Then the door creaked open, revealing a dim hallway lined with old photographs and shelves crowded with dusty books. Eleanor appeared from the shadows, her thin frame wrapped in a grey shawl. "You shouldn't be here," Eleanor said, her voice sharp. Sarah swallowed her fear. "Please, tell me what's happening. Tell me why they're after my daughter." For a long moment, Eleanor just stared at her. Then she stepped aside. "Come in." The interior of Eleanor's home was unlike anything Sarah had expected. Candles flickered in every corner, their wax pooled onto saucers. Strange symbols were etched into the floorboards, drawn with chalk and ash. Glass jars filled with herbs, bones, and stones lined the shelves. The air smelled of sage and something metallic, like iron. Eleanor led her into a small sitting room. On the mantel rested a faded photograph of a little girl, Eleanor's daughter. The resemblance to Emily was startling. Same round face, same wide eyes. "They are not ghosts," Eleanor began, her eyes distant. "Not demons, either. Not in the way churches would tell you. They are the hollow ones. Shadows that feed on fear, on innocence. They took my daughter. They will not take yours." Sarah's throat tightened. "Why Emily? Why children?" "Because children's hearts are unguarded," Eleanor whispered. "Their light is pure. The hollow ones devour it, until nothing is left." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, Sarah saw the sorrow etched into her lined face. "I failed my child. I will not fail again." Sarah felt torn between gratitude and dread. "Then what do we do?" Eleanor placed her lantern on the table. Its glow was faint in the daylight, but Sarah could sense its strange energy. "This light is not mine," Eleanor explained. "It is drawn from years of rituals, prayers, sacrifices. It weakens them, but it cannot destroy them. Only your family's strength, your bond, can keep them from feeding." Sarah shivered. "And if we fail?" Eleanor's eyes darkened. "Then they will not stop until your home is empty, and your child is theirs." That evening, Sarah told David everything. He listened, pale and silent, his skepticism crumbling under the weight of last night's encounter. Still, he struggled to accept Eleanor's story. "It sounds like madness," he muttered. "Hollow ones, lanterns, rituals. It's too much." "But you saw it," Sarah said firmly. "You can't deny that." David rubbed his face with trembling hands. "Then what do we do? How do we fight something we can't even understand?" Emily spoke quietly from the corner, clutching her sketchbook. "We trust her. She's been helping us all along." The room fell silent. For once, David had no argument. That night, Sarah awoke to the sound of whispers. They weren't coming from outside, they were inside the walls, dozens of voices murmuring, weaving together into a terrible chorus. She rose from bed, following the sound down the hallway. Her breath caught when she saw the wallpaper rippling, as if something beneath it were pressing outward. Fingers. Long, black fingers clawed against the plaster, trying to break through. Before she could scream, a sudden light flooded the hallway. Eleanor stood outside the window across the yard, lantern raised high. The whispers died, the fingers retreating back into the darkness. Sarah pressed her hands to her mouth, trembling. For the first time, she realized something terrifying but undeniable. They were not safe anywhere, not even within their own walls. And without Eleanor, they wouldn't survive the night. Adrian's nights had grown heavier, each one tangled with strange dreams. Sometimes he dreamt of Mrs. Marlowe standing at the edge of his bed, her wrinkled hands raised as though casting a protective spell. Other times he saw her house engulfed in shadows, whispering voices curling around its dark corners. He would wake drenched in sweat, unsure if what he experienced was dream or reality. One evening, after weeks of confusion, Adrian returned home late from work. The streetlights along Cedar Lane flickered, plunging parts of the block into darkness. He noticed Mrs. Marlowe's house again. Her curtains parted ever so slightly, just enough for a faint glimmer of candlelight to spill through. Against his better judgment, his curiosity pushed him forward. He stepped onto her porch and raised his hand to knock, but before he could, the door creaked open. The smell of dried herbs and something faintly metallic drifted out. Mrs. Marlowe stood there, her silver hair tied neatly, her eyes unreadable. "You shouldn't be here, Adrian," she said quietly. "Not tonight." Her voice wasn't threatening, but it carried weight, almost like a plea. Adrian hesitated. "Why not tonight?" She glanced past him, scanning the street, then whispered, "Because tonight, it circles closer." Before he could question her, a loud crash echoed from his house next door. Adrian spun around, heart hammering. The sound came from the nursery. He bolted back, stumbling into his home. His wife was already running upstairs, panic on her face. The nursery door was ajar, and the window inside was wide open, though they had locked it earlier that evening. Cold wind whipped the curtains. Their baby was still in the crib, crying hysterically, untouched but trembling as though something had been hovering near. Adrian shut the window quickly, scanning the yard below. Nothing. Just shadows stretching unnaturally long in the pale moonlight. When he turned, Mrs. Marlowe was standing silently in the hallway behind them. They hadn't heard her enter. "I told you," she said softly. "It watches. But it will not touch. Not as long as I'm here." Her words, cryptic yet strangely reassuring, left Adrian and his wife frozen. She placed something small on the dresser beside the crib, an old iron key, blackened with age. "This will keep it away for now. But do not throw it out. Ever." Then, without another word, she slipped out of the house and back into her own. The next morning, Adrian decided he could no longer stand being in the dark. He needed answers. So he did what he thought best. He went to the town's oldest library. He dug into the archives, searching for any mention of Mrs. Marlowe or the history of her home. What he found made his skin crawl. Decades ago, long before Adrian was born, the Marlowe family lived in the same house. They had a daughter, Eleanor, bright, kind, beloved by the neighborhood. But one night, the child vanished from her room without a trace. Some whispered of kidnappers, others believed something darker had taken her. Mrs. Marlowe never left the house after that night. Her husband had passed years later, leaving her entirely alone. But the rumors grew that she had bargained with unseen forces to protect children from suffering Eleanor's fate. That she had dedicated her life to keeping it from crossing into the homes of others. The iron keys, the strange herbs, the sleepless nights, they weren't signs of madness. They were her shield, her vigil. Adrian sat frozen in the dim library, the dusty clippings spread before him. It all made sense now. The whispers, the stares from neighbors, the stories of her being creepy. None of them knew the truth. She had become the wall between families like his and the thing that lurked in the shadows. That night, Adrian found it impossible to sleep. The cries of the baby earlier still echoed in his mind. His wife, though shaken, trusted his judgment. They left the iron key on the nursery dresser, as instructed. Sometime past midnight, the air grew heavy. The baby stirred, whimpered, then fell silent again. Adrian sat upright in bed, every sense on high alert. Then he heard it, the faintest scratching at the window, like nails dragging across glass. He rushed to the nursery, heart pounding. Through the curtains, he saw it, a shadow darker than the night itself, tall and crooked, its edges shifting like smoke. Two glowing eyes fixed on him from beyond the glass. The baby wailed again. Before Adrian could move, Mrs. Marlowe appeared in the doorway. She looked frilier than ever, her hands trembling, but her eyes burned with determination. "It's stronger tonight," she whispered. Then she stepped forward, placing herself between the crib and the window. She began to chant in a language Adrian did not recognize, her voice low but unyielding. The shadow pressed harder against the glass, the window rattling as though it might shatter. Adrian's instinct screamed at him to help, but something told him he couldn't interfere. The air buzzed with energy, the lights flickered, and the smell of burning herbs filled the room. Finally, with a cry that was both human and not, the shadow recoiled, vanishing into the night. The window pane cracked but held. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the baby's soft hiccuping sobs. Mrs. Marlowe swayed on her feet, clutching her chest. Adrian caught her before she could fall. "Why?" he whispered hoarsely. "Why would you do this for us?" She gave him a weak smile, tears glistening in her tired eyes. "Because once, no one protected my child. I won't let that happen again. Not while I still breathe." With that, she slipped from his arms, her strength finally spent. She collapsed, her body frail as glass. The funeral was small. Few attended. Most neighbors still feared or misunderstood her. But Adrian stood by the casket, his wife and child beside him, silently thanking the woman who had saved them. Weeks later, while cleaning their home, Adrian found something tucked beneath the baby's crib. Another photograph, an old, faded picture of Eleanor Marlowe. On the back, in delicate handwriting, were the words, "Protect them, even when they never know." Adrian kept the iron key on the dresser, never daring to remove it. Every night, when he kissed his child goodnight, he glanced toward the window, silently remembering the woman everyone feared but who had been their truest protector. And though her house next door now sat empty, sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, Adrian swore he heard footsteps pacing gently in the hallway. Steady, watchful, protective. The shadows never returned. But the family knew why. Mrs. Marlowe was still keeping watch.